All right, guys, the name of this message is going to be Hello, can I schedule a consultation? Hello, can I schedule a consultation? This is going to be a fun little interesting little message right here. A consultation is simply when you want to go and sit down with somebody to seek advice from them, to seek help. Maybe you feel like you need help in a situation, a good word, a good piece of advice, and you think if you can sit down and talk with maybe a professional, maybe you can get some help. But a lot of times, and here's the catch, a lot of times with folks, even though sometimes people may want a real opinion that will help them, sometimes people just want to hear what they want to hear. So if they sit down and talk with you and you try to give them advice that is really going to be helpful to them, if it's not what they want to hear, if you don't say what it is that they thought you should have said, they just don't want to hear it. They might even get mad at you and get up and storm out of the room because the advice you gave them was probably the opposite of what they already had in mind. And sometimes if somebody already has everything thought out and planned out and they know how things should go, they got their version of the story, they got their way of thinking of how things should play out, when somebody else tells them otherwise, they just don't like it. Even though supposedly they came there for real advice, or whether it was something they wanted to hear or not, they just wanted the truth and some help. So that's what it means, just going and sitting down, sometimes possibly paying somebody to sit down and listen to you talk, listen to you vent for a while on what's going on. And that's something else. Sometimes people just want someone to vent to them. Sometimes people just want a listening ear. But here's the issue with it. Sometimes you have people who, some people really are good listeners and some people really just want to help. They've got a good heart and good intentions in mind. But sometimes you have people who they're just a listening ear, not because they care, but because they're nosy and because they like being in people's business and because they just want to hear something that they can gossip to other people about later to attract more quote unquote friends. So you have to be careful who you speak to, who you use as a lending ear. But there's also something else. Also, there are people that you shouldn't try to consult with, if you will, simply because, well, they are associated with the powers of darkness. They are associated with the works of the enemy, the great adversary, the devil, whether they know it or not. And so you may go to somebody who may try to help you in some way or may try to help you get what you want. And they may even have so-called good intentions in mind themselves, but the ways of going about getting your help, the ways of going about seeking an answer may not be good, may be in ways that are against God. And you may say, well, what do you mean? Well, that's what we're going to get into. People that you should not be consulting with. And I'll end this message talking about people that would be a great idea to consult with. But let's start out with this. If you are following along in the Word, go with me to Deuteronomy chapter 18. And we'll start at verse 9. Let's see here. There we go. Okay. It says, when thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, thou shalt not learn to do after the abominations of those nations. They kind of rhymes, abominations of those nations. But anyway, So God here is just telling his people as we're traveling about, and I'm getting you to your promised land or to your destination or to wherever we're trying to go to. As we're traveling and we go through different lands and different nations of people, you got to understand that some of these people worship false gods. And so they have customs and traditions that they do that I will call abominations, things that I call ritualistically unclean, because there are things that they do that are of your enemy, the devil. Things that they do to worship and seek and honor and reverence their so-called gods, their little g gods. And so I don't want you to do these things that they do, these abominations. Verse 10. There shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or daughter to pass through the fire. One of the things that people did sometimes they would have their children sacrificed. They would sacrifice their kids to these false gods. They may have a statue of some false god, this idol that has been created with man's hands, and they would take their own children and have them burned, or completely totally burned, or simply have them walk through fire, or passing through the fire, as the word says. So he's saying, don't have any of your kids do that. Moving on, it says, or that uses divination. Divination is like a type of witchcraft that could be used for false prophets, false prophecies, false statements. It says, comma, or an observer of times. That could be something like a soothsayer or a fortune teller, looking in the crystal ball, looking through the smoke, trying to see what we can in the clouds. Let's see here. Comma, or an enchanter. An enchanter could be someone who does stuff like whispers or hisses, spells, chanting out spells, casting spells. Comma, or a witch. We know what that is. Somebody who practices witchcraft or sorcery. Usually, a lot of times the women are called witches and the guys are called wizards, but whatever. It all ties together. Verse 11, or a charmer. And that's one who can use spells to join or unite or make an ally with somebody, using spells to get people to like them, to be in love with them, or to just simply be an ally with them, to join up with them, to company with them. And a lot of times if a person wants something and they see a particular person that they think they can use to get the advantage, they may want to charm them, all for the purpose of using them. And it comes in handy if you need to, I guess, unite with somebody who was once a great enemy, and maybe you still don't like him, you still don't care for him, but you look at it as, well, if I can use them and eventually just step right on over them to the next person, if I can put the charms on, then I can make this work. Next thing, comma, or a consulter with familiar spirits. And so now we're really getting into the meat of things with the title of this message. Hello, can I schedule a consultation? One of the things that you don't want to do, one of the consultations that you don't want to start up, is the consulting of familiar spirits. What does that mean? It can mean a person who tries to talk to the dead, if you will. Someone who would seek a necromancer or something of the sort. The next thing in the list, comma, or a wizard. Like I said, you could call that a male version of a witch. But also it can be one who knows things because they have a familiar spirit. Sometimes it seems like a person may know things about you, and sometimes it could be because God has shown them things, or sometimes it could be because they have a familiar spirit. They have a spirit attached to them that they should not. Lowercase spirit, not capital S spirit as in the Holy Spirit, but lowercase spirit. Keep that in mind. A familiar spirit. And then last on the list, a necromancer, which is, of course, a person who can be sought out to contact or to question the dead. Verse 12, it says, for all that do these things are an abomination unto the Lord, and because of these abominations the Lord thy God doth drive them out from before thee. So he's letting his people know up front, these are things to avoid. These are things to stay away from. These are people to not consult with. You want to know something? Talk to me. I've moved in a great and mighty powerful way to set you free from slavery, from the bondages of the Egyptians, taking you into your promised land, wanting to take you to a land flowing with milk and honey. I'm wanting to give you land for days. But if you need something, consult me. Be careful who you consult. These are a list of folks to not consult with. That's basically what it all comes down to. So going to 1 Samuel now, chapter 28. I'll give y'all a second to get there. I'll just take a quick sip of water. But 1 Samuel chapter 28, we'll start at verse 3. It says this: Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had lamented him and buried him in Ramah, even in his own city. And Saul had put away those that had familiar spirits and the wizards out of the land. Let me reread that verse, because it's going to come in handy here soon. Right, rewind. Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had lamented him and buried him in Ramah, even in his own city. And Saul, talking about King Saul, had put away those that had familiar spirits and the wizards out of the land. So Saul has put those people out of the land at this point in time. Now let's keep going. Verse 4. And the Philistines gathered themselves together and came and pitched in Shunem, and Saul gathered all Israel together, and they pitched in Gilboa. And when Saul saw the host of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart greatly trembled. Then and when Saul inquired of the Lord, which is another way of saying he consulted with the Lord, he went and sought the Lord to ask him questions, to seek his guidance on this issue of what's going on, because he sees the enemy, his people, the Israelites, they're in camp, the enemy, the Philistines, they're in camp, and he's seeking them out, and he's seeing that it's not looking so good for him. So he's seeking God, or wanting to see God, to see if he's going to be able to have the victory in this battle. But it says this: the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by prophets. So he ain't answering him at all. He's not talking straight to Saul. He's not using prophets. He's not using dreams or visions. I mean, he is just not talking to him at all. Just not at all. Not even a little bit. Why? This is the same Saul that earlier in scripture there was a battle. And God was going to give his people the victory. He was going to give Saul and the Israelites the victory in this battle. And what he had told them was, when you go and you destroy these people, I want you to utterly destroy them. And everything that has anything to do with them, destroy them, their land, and all their spoil. Don't take any of their stuff with you. Just destroy it and move on. But he went on ahead and let people take stuff. And then later, when he had to answer to God for it, he just blamed it on the people. Well, that's what they wanted. And it wasn't that Saul cared so much about the people and so much about what they wanted. It's just that he had gotten to a place where he cared more about the people and what the people, or not caring about the people, but he cared more about pleasing the people to continue to have his good likings of the people and his compliments of the people, because it made him feel good about himself. He got more concerned about that than what God had to say. He got more caught up in the compliments and the pats on the back from the people, and feeling well complimented and well looked up to by the people, versus being more concerned with pleasing God and being about what God had to say in his will. So that's what he did. If the people said one thing and God said the other, he went along with what the people said. because he just felt like it was more security for his position, even though it was really God that gave him that position. So it didn't make sense. But he was more in his flesh than what he should have been. He was not getting into the spirit to make these decisions. He got in his flesh. He was concerned about not being naysayed by the people. He was too concerned about the opinions of man instead of the opinions, or rather the facts of God. And so that's what really cost him. And so it had gotten to the point where he became so rebellious and so in his flesh that it caused God to not speak to him, and to not even use anybody else to speak to him either. So here we are in verse 7. It says, "Then said Saul unto his servants," listen to this, "Seek me a woman that hath a familiar spirit, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servant said to him, Behold, there is a woman that hath a familiar spirit at Endor." So he's going after this woman. But we just read in verse 3, the first verse I read of this, that he had put away those types of people. But now he's going to go consult them, inquire of them. And I want to pause and say this. One of the mistakes that people make is this: when they get so rebellious and they just want to do things their way or the people's way instead of God's way, and let's say God stops responding, God stops speaking to them, instead of doing the right thing and doing what it is they know they're supposed to do, instead of going and making things right and saying, okay, God, I'm going to finally submit. I'm going to do what you're saying. I get it now. You're acting as though you're not acknowledging me simply because I haven't acknowledged what you've told me. So let me go ahead and acknowledge what you've told me and do what you said so you can acknowledge me again. Instead of just doing that, they get all puffed up with pride and get their chest all out, and they're like, okay, you know what, God, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm going to back up, and I'm going to come over here and consult with these people that I'm really not supposed to be consulting with. So all because he's not getting his way, and all because he's not getting what he wants, to be spiteful and as a slap in the face to God, he's just like, all right, let me take steps backwards in my walk with you, and let me go attach myself to people that I put away in honor of you. Let me keep going. I really believe somebody needed that right there. It's not good to backtrack and consult with those and reattach yourself with those, all because you don't want to open your ear up. You're taking steps backwards. You're not helping the situation. You're going backwards from the progress that you've made. So let's look at this, verse 8. And Saul disguised himself. So he knows he's in the wrong, because now he's got to disguise himself. He's not even going to speak to this woman as himself, as King Saul. He's just fixing to go and disguise himself. It says, and he put on other raiment. Now, isn't that interesting? He's not going to wear the raiment or the clothing of a king. He's going to put on some other raiment to disguise himself. But in order to do that, to put on other raiment than kingly raiment would be to do what? To humble himself. But why didn't he just humble himself before God a moment ago? Oh my goodness. He could have just humbled himself a moment ago before God and said, God, I'm sorry, let me get on the right track. But instead, he'd rather humble himself by disguising him. Okay. All right. He doesn't want to humble himself for the King of Kings, but he'll humble himself by taking off his kingly robe. All right, whatever. We're gonna move on. I could just go on and on that one for a while, but I'm gonna move on. Okay, and Saul disguised himself and put on other raiment, and he went, and 2 men with him, And they came to the woman by night, and he said, and it would be by night that they go see the woman. Let me use this darkness to cover myself even more while I go visit a woman who operates through the powers of spiritual darkness. Okay. This verse, man, I can just go on and on this verse for a while, but let me keep going. And he said, I pray thee, divine unto me by the familiar spirit, and bring me him up, whom I shall name unto thee. So he's got somebody in mind that he wants this woman to bring back, to lift up from the dead. Verse 9. And the woman said unto him, behold, thou knowest what Saul hath done. So right away when he addresses this woman, the woman's like, well, you know what Saul's done? She's talking to him about Saul because she doesn't know that it's Saul she's talking to, because he's in disguise. So now she's talking to Saul about Saul. He's trying to consult her to consult a familiar spirit, but she's trying to consult Saul about Saul, you know. This is great. Man, this is something else right here. But anyway, she's saying, behold, thou knowest what Saul has done, how he hath cut off those that have familiar spirits and the wizards out of the land. Wherefore then layest thou a snare for my life to cause me to die? So she's saying, you know what Saul has done in this land. You're setting me up to die. You're setting me up for disaster if I get caught doing this. Verse 10, and Saul sware to her by the Lord, saying, as the Lord liveth, there shall no punishment happen to thee for this thing. Now he's telling on himself right here because he's sounding like Saul is sounding like the serpent in the garden talking to Eve. Oh, don't worry about what God says or what God's going to do. You can eat from this apple. And then he throws in the, I swear to God. Oh goodness, this is some stuff right here. We're gonna move on though. Then said the woman, whom shall I bring unto thee? And he said, bring me up Samuel. Remember in verse 3, the rewind I had, and it talked about how Samuel died. So now he's trying to talk to Samuel, somebody that we know has died. So he's just digging himself into some trouble. Saul is just making his situation worse. He just ain't trying to fix it, is he? He's just, well, he is. He's trying to fix it his own way. That's the problem, but we're going to move on. Let's see here. Verse 12, and when the woman saw Samuel, she cried with a loud voice, and the woman spake to Saul, saying, why hast thou deceived me? For thou art Saul. So she realizes that this is Saul that she's speaking to. So she's freaking out. Why have you tricked me? Similar to when Eve tried to explain that the serpent beguiled her or tricked her. Verse 13, and the king said unto her, be not afraid, for what sawest thou? And the woman said unto Saul, I saw gods ascending out of the earth. And he said unto her, what form is he of? And she said, an old man cometh up, and he is covered with a mantle. And Saul perceived that it was Samuel, and he stood with his face to the ground and bowed himself. And Samuel said to Saul, why hast thou disquieted me to bring me up? And Saul answered, I am sore distressed, for the Philistines make war against me, and God is departed from me, and answereth me no more, neither by prophets nor by dreams. Therefore I have called thee, that thou mayest make known unto me what I shall do. So he's saying, listen, I need help from you. I'm waking you up to say, listen, I need help. God, I'm in this battle that's coming up. I don't know how it's going to play out. I've tried to talk to God about it. God's not talking to me anymore. He's not even using people to talk to me. I mean, it's just bad. It's getting rough. I need your help. You need to tell me something. Then said Samuel, wherefore then dost thou ask of me, saying, the Lord is departed from me, and is become thine enemy. So what he's basically saying here is this. He's saying his response, the first part of Samuel's response to Saul basically is this. Listen, if God is not helping you, what can I do? If God himself can't help you, there's nothing I can do. I mean, really? Sometimes you kind of have to be that way with some folks. I'm not saying you shouldn't be there for them and help them out in their times of need and distress, but there are some times when people just keep falling further and further away from God, and instead of trying to fix the problem and do right, they just keep trying to duck and dodge and do things the wrong way. And there has to come a point where you just got to tell them, hey, you're coming to me because you want me to tell you things that you want to hear. You want me to just say something so that way when you go and goof off and do something you shouldn't do, you could turn around and point the finger at me and blame me, kind of like how Saul already did when when God told him to utterly destroy these people, and he takes spoil anyway, and then later blames the people when he was over. God put him in charge of the people. He was supposed to put his foot down. But sometimes you have to do that. You got to be like, listen, if God can't help you in this situation, or he's not going to help you, then, what more can I do? He has no God beside him. There is no other. So I ain't even beside him to be trying to overstep him and try to help you in a way that God or any type of a God could. Verse 17, and the Lord hath done to him as he spake by me, for the Lord hath rent the kingdom out of thine hand and given it to thy neighbor, even to David. So now he's letting them know, listen, now the issue that you got to realize is because of this, because of your disobedience, because of all these things that you keep doing to try to just do things your way, and now this mess you're involved in now, all that's really happening is you're setting it up to where your kingdom and all that you have can be distributed down to somebody else, your neighbor, to David. In other words, what you didn't do, somebody else will. What you won't take care of, God will use somebody else to take care of it. He'll raise someone up to continue to raise his people up to this standard that he has. Verse 18, because thou obeyest not the voice of God, nor executest his fierce wrath upon Amalek, therefore hath the Lord done this thing unto thee this day. So now he's saying, listen, it's at a point where you've tried to basically pretend you don't know what's going on, act like you don't know what the problem is, and now you want this pity party, but you're trying to get everybody to feel bad for you while you're acting like you don't know what's going on. But the reality of it is, you do know. You know where you've messed up. You know you haven't tried to fix it. You know you've just kept running from God, doing this your own way. Look at this position you're in now. You know what the deal is. This is on you. No one else is to blame. You've had it all handed to you on a silver platter, and you just knocked it over. That's what it all comes down to. We have got to be careful, guys, who we consult with. Now, let me go to Exodus. Let's go to Exodus. Exodus chapter 7, starting at verse 8. I'll get another quick drink of water real quick. All right, Exodus chapter 7. Gonna read some verses and then skip and read a few more verses and so on. Don't want to spend too much time in this, but basically what's going on here, we know the story, we know how it plays out. We know God uses Moses and his brother Aaron to set his people free from the Egyptians, and we know how it plays out. We know that it starts out with God sending Moses to go tell King Pharaoh, let my people go. And we know that he doesn't listen. We know about these plagues that play out, and we know that how it ends is God parts the sea so that his people can walk through on dry land, but the waters come crashing down on the Egyptians and their chariots. But now let's look at something in this. When Moses is going and trying to reason with Pharaoh off and on, and Pharaoh keeps turning them down, I want to look at some details of how that played out, and we're going to see something here. Look at verse 8. It says, "And the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, When Pharaoh shall speak unto you, saying, Show a miracle for you, then thou shalt say unto Aaron, Take thy rod and cast it before Pharaoh, and it shall become a serpent. And Moses and Aaron went in unto Pharaoh, and they did so as the Lord had commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent. Then Pharaoh also called the wise men and the sorcerers. Now the magicians of Egypt, they also did in like manner with their enchantments." So now Pharaoh has consulted with the sorcerers and the magicians of Egypt to try to compete, to try to say, oh, well, this God that y'all serve, this God that is using you to come to me to say, let his people go, whatever. I got some folks that can do the same little tricks that he can do. So let's have a showdown is basically what's going on here. So he calls these people with their enchantments to try to basically mimic, okay, and do a counterfeit version of whatever it is that God is trying to do. And so verse 12 says, "For they cast down every man his rod, and they became serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods." So Aaron, Moses' brother, his rod swallows up their rods. So they tried to compete, and they got ate up. But let's keep going. This little back and forth battle continues. Go down to verse 19. It says, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, say unto Aaron, Take thy rod and stretch out thine hand upon the waters of Egypt, upon their streams, upon their rivers, and upon their ponds, and upon all their pools of water, that they may become blood, and that there may be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. And Moses and Aaron did so as the Lord commanded, and he lifted up the rod, and smote the waters that were in the river in the sight of Pharaoh, and in the sight of his servants. And all the waters that were in the river were turned to blood. And the fish that was in the river died, and the river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink of the water of the river. And there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt." So they go from using the rods to turning them into serpents, to now using the rod to smite the waters turning into blood. And of course that causes problems for the Egyptians because they can't drink the waters. Verse 22 says, "And the magicians of Egypt did so with their enchantment." So here they go. They're trying to battle them out, even though really it just seems to really hurt them in the long run because it's their waters and their territory they got to destroy in order to prove this point that they can compete. But anyway, whatever. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, neither did he hearken unto them as the Lord had said. So now let's look over at the next chapter. Chapter 8, verse 5, it says, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, say unto Aaron, Stretch forth thine hand with thy rod over the streams, over the rivers, and over the ponds, and cause frogs to come up upon the land of Egypt. And Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land. And the magicians did so with their enchantments, and brought up frogs upon the land of Egypt." So it just seems like they're not accepting the reality that they're just making their own situation worse by trying to mimic the things of God. They're just adding more to their own plague. It's just, anyway, what do I know though? Anyway, we're going to move on down to verse 16, and this will be the last little section I read from Exodus. Verse 16, it says, "And the Lord said unto Moses, Say unto Aaron, Stretch out thy rod and smite the dust of the land, that it may become lice throughout all the land of Egypt." So now it's lice. Verse 17, and they did so, for Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod and smote the dust of the earth, and it became lice in man and in beast. All the dust of the land became lice throughout all the land of Egypt. That's gotta suck. Freaking lice everywhere. And verse 18 says, and the magicians did so with their enchantments to bring forth lice, but they could not. So after going on and on, trying to mimic God, trying to do their version of what God is using these rookies to do, they don't even know what they're doing. They're just doing whatever God says. God says, raise up this rod. They just raise it up and stuff happens. But these people are folks, the people working for Pharaoh are folks that are experienced. They've been doing this type of stuff for years. And it just seems like they're trying to compete with these rookies. And all of a sudden, they've run out of tricks. No more tricks up their sleeves. And so it doesn't work out. And so this is what happens. It says this, so there were lice upon, sorry about that. No, that's right. And the magicians did so with their enchantments to bring forth lice, but they could not. So there were lice upon man and upon beast. Now watch this. Verse 19, it says, then the magician said unto Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he hearkened not unto them as the Lord said. He was butthurt. He was mad. It got to the point where the magicians had to call it quits. The enchanters had to call it quits. The sorcerers and the wizards had to call it quits. They're like, hey, listen, these might be some rookies we're competing with, but hey, the source behind what they're doing is God, and this is the finger of God himself. Yes, they serve a God. Yes, this God is powerful, and even if there are other gods, the God they're serving seems to be the most powerful, because we sure can't compete with it. We're out. Deuces. That's it. That's just all there was to it. They just had to go on and admit it with their own mouths. And it kind of makes me think of that verse in the Bible that lets us know that there's coming a day that every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess that Jesus is Lord and that our God is the one true God. After all this competing, they got to a point where they had to just go ahead and admit, listen, this is the finger of God, and I'm bowing on out of here. But anyway, let's go to Psalms. The rest of these verses that I'm going to go through should go by quite a bit quicker than everything else I've gone over. Psalms, let's see here, chapter 62. Let's look at something. Psalm 62, we'll just start right here at the beginning. This is David speaking. The same David that it was said to Saul just a moment ago by Samuel. It looks like God's going to, give your stuff over to your neighbor, even David. This is David writing here. It says this, why boastest thou thyself in mischief, O mighty man? The goodness of God endureth continually. The tongue devises mischiefs like a sharp razor, working deceitfully. Oh, I'm sorry. We didn't want to hear that. The tongue deviseth mischiefs like a sharp razor, working deceitfully. All right, go with me to 62. I'm sorry, I was reading verse 52, guys, by the way, 52. But now let's go to 62. We're going to see more about mischief. So now here David is again. Now watch what else he says about mischief. It says, truly my soul waiteth upon God. From him cometh my salvation. He only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be greatly moved. So he's saying God is his all. Nothing can stop him with God. All things are possible through God, through Jesus Christ. He's our strength. But now look at this verse 3. It says, how long will ye imagine mischief against a man? Ye shall be slain all of you, as a bowing wall shall ye be, and as a tottering fence. So you can have action, a verb. Your tongue can speak mischief out against people. We know that. But here in verse 3, I want you to see there's even the problem of imagining mischief. In other words, you might not be acting out something or speaking negative with your tongue, causing mischief with the tongue, but even just in your mind, imagining it is the problem. Why? Because that's where it starts, in the mind. Many times the enemy attacks us in the mind and uses the mind, because once we let these imaginations continue to play out and form and develop in our minds, and we dwell on it and meditate on it for too long, we end up acting out those things. And so then it comes out through the tongue, and then it comes out through the actions. Get what I'm saying? So he's saying, how long will ye imagine mischief against a man? And then it talks about being a bowing wall and a tottering fence. You know, this actually makes me think of a message I recently done where I was talking about Balak and Balaam. You had Balak, this one ruler who consults secretly with people to get them to go and consult with Balaam. And he is trying to get Balaam to come to him, and he's trying to talk Balaam into cursing God's people, because you have Balak, who had been very deceitful, very selfish, and saw God's people getting ready to make a move, and he didn't want this to happen because it was going to be out of his control and it wasn't going to be all about him. So he starts consulting with people, the elders and people in high rankings, and he's consulting with them and getting them involved in divination, and he gets people to go to him, to Balaam, to get him to come and to curse the people. And of course it ended up backfiring, and that's where this comes in. It's like he had these thoughts in his head, these imaginations in his head, and he kept using the tongue to let these things be spoken to these people, and everybody speaking these things and getting Balaam to come and speak things over the people, this curse over the people. So imagining this mischief playing out in the tongue, mischief playing out in actions, but it caused them to be like a bowing wall or a tottering fence. In other words, it caused them to be so unstable in their mind. It caused them to be so double-minded in their ways, to where it played out the opposite of what they wanted. It backfired, and so then they kept trying to do things like reverse the curse, because the curse had fell upon them, and so they became all wishy-washy. They went from being two kings that didn't really like each other, that came together for a deceitful, ungodly purpose, to now they got to be all buddy-buddy, because now they're working together to try to undo the curse. It was just a mess. I mean, the whole story was a plumb mess. But that's how they became very unstable, very double-minded, almost like Didymus, the message I just recently done, or one of the ones I just recently done last week, the Didymus diagnosis, as I called it. Doubting Thomas, also known as Didymus, being 2 in 1, a bit double-minded, using double standards. But anyway, moving on to verse 4, it says, they only consult, here we are with that word again, they only consult to cast him down from his excellency. They delight in lies. They bless with their mouth, but they curse inwardly. Sometimes, to put on a show, people will say nice things with their mouth. They'll say, oh, I want good for my people. I want good for my friends. I want good for my coworkers. I want good for my town. I want good for my community. I want good for this. I want good for that. Let me speak blessings to you. Let's come together and pray blessings. And they're saying these things to put on a show to cover for themselves. But inwardly, they are like ravening wolves. Inwardly, they are cursing. Inwardly. Almost makes me think of Scar from Lion King. Trying to have Mufasa killed so he could be king, even though it was supposed to be Simba's turn. So now he's got to try to destroy Simba and try to use what should have been Simba's own people or Simba's own fellow lions against him to try to have him killed so he could stay king. Meanwhile, the land is cursed and everything's falling apart, but everybody's got to play dumb and act like it's all right. It's just a mess, right? Y'all know what I'm talking about. But that's kind of how they're being. They're being like Balak. They're being like Saul. They're being like Pharaoh. They're being like Scar. You should be listening to Mufasa, but instead we got to listen to Scar. But anyway, speaking good things and pretending things outwardly, but inwardly cursing. It almost makes me think of when Jesus in the Gospels was talking to some folks and he was having to tell them, you bless me with your mouth. You speak good things with your mouth. You worship me with your mouth. But your heart is far from me. You're saying something, but inwardly you're thinking and feeling and saying something totally different. So we see two things here in verse 3 and verse 4, the imagining of mischief and consulting to cast down excellency. Why do I bring that up? Go with me real quick to 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians chapter 10. Starting here, verse 12, it says this: O our God, wilt thou not judge them? For we have no might against this great company that cometh against us. Neither know we what to do, but our eyes are upon thee. And all Judah stood before the Lord with their little ones, their wives, and their children. Then upon Jahaziel, the son of Zechariah, the son of Benaiah, the son of Jael, the son of Mattaniah, a Levite of the sons of Asaph, came the Spirit of the Lord in the midst of the congregation. And he said, Hearken ye all Judah, and ye inhabitants of Jerusalem, and thou king of Jehoshaphat. Thus saith the Lord unto you, Be not afraid nor dismayed by reason of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's. So we have these people. They're crying out to God because there's a battle coming. And what they're doing is they're seeking God. They're consulting God. Not consulting the powers of darkness. They're consulting God. And so God has used one of their people. His Spirit has come upon them, and he uses this person to speak. And he's letting them know that God will help them. And not only that, but really the battle is God's. It's his. Look at this. Tomorrow go ye down against them. Behold, they come up by the cliff of Ziz, and ye shall find them at the end of the brook before the wilderness of Jeruel. Ye shall not need to fight in this battle. Set yourselves, stand ye still, and see the salvation of the Lord with you. O Judah and Jerusalem, fear not, nor be dismayed. Tomorrow go out against them, for the Lord will be with you. It sounds similar to when Moses was telling the people, as God was setting them free, stand back and see the salvation of the Lord. Verse 18, and Jehoshaphat bowed his head with his face to the ground, and all Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem fell before the Lord, worshiping the Lord. So not only did all the people come together to seek God for an answer, then when they get their answer, they go right back to worshiping him even more. In other words, before the battle, before this victory, They're already worshiping him in advance. They're thanking him in advance. So not only do they show their gratefulness and their gratitude, but it shows their faith, because it's through the faith of believing that God has their back and will save them that they would be worshiping, right? Verse 19, and the Levites of the children of Kohathites and of the children of the Korites stood up to praise the Lord God of Israel with a loud voice on high. And they rose early in the morning and went forth into the wilderness of Tekoa. And as they went forth, Jehoshaphat stood and said, Hear me, O Judah, and ye inhabitants of Jerusalem. Believe in the Lord your God, so shall ye be established. Believe his prophets, so shall ye prosper. And when he had consulted with the people, he appointed singers unto the Lord, and that should praise the beauty of holiness as they went out before the army, and to say, Praise the Lord, for his mercy endureth forever. So they were already seeking God, consulting with him. They get the thumbs up from God, they get the word from God, and then they're praising him even more. And then you got somebody that goes and consults with some folks to get singers for God and get everybody even more amped up, and you know what I mean, getting everybody even more ready to see what God's going to do in this battle. So we see a consultation of God, and we see a consultation of people getting with other people of God, but not speaking mischief, not seeking vengeance, not speaking evil or curses, but saying, come on, let's do even more for God. Let's really praise him. Let's really do something. Let's really show our faith. While we're on our way to battle, let's be singing. That's some good consultation right there, baby. That's some good stuff. Let's look at this. And when they began to sing and to praise the Lord set ambushments against the children of Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir, which were come against Judah, and they were smitten. See that though at the beginning of that verse? And when they began to sing and praise, and when they began to sing and praise, their enemies became destroyed. Not as they're speaking evil unto each other, not dogging each other out, this and that. Nope. It all worked for the good of those who loved God. By the way, that was 2 Chronicles chapter 20. I don't know if I'm even saying these verses right anymore. I'm just so excited and jumping all into this and rushing all through it. But yeah, that was 2 Chronicles. I might have said Corinthians, but I do have a 2 Corinthians I'm about to go to. But that was 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verses 12 through 22. So now that you got that, let me find it here. Nehemiah chapter 5, and let's look at this. Starting here at the beginning, it says, And there was a great cry of the people and of their wives against their brethren, the Jews. For there were that said, We, our sons and our daughters, are many. Therefore we take up corn for them, that we may eat and live. Some also there were that said, We have mortgaged our lands, vineyards, and houses, that we might buy corn because of the dearth. There were also that said, We have borrowed money for the king's tribute, and that upon our lands and vineyards. Yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children. And lo, we bring into bondage our sons and our daughters to be servants. And some of our daughters are brought unto bondage already. Neither is it in our power to redeem them, for other men have our lands and vineyards. So this is what the writer's saying. And then in verse 6 it says, And I was angry when I heard their cry in these words. So we see people, God's people, they're going at it. They're having issues. You know, it's like people are having to sell each other out or selling them own selves short, giving up their lands, their vineyards, their children. And he's saying that he's tired of hearing this. He's angry when hearing about all this stuff going on with his people, with God's people. People are loaning stuff out and building up interest and purposely causing debt for people, and it's just everybody doing each other wrong, and everybody's getting done in the process of this. Verse 7, it says this. Look at this. Then I consulted with myself, and I rebuked the nobles and the rulers, and said unto them, Ye exact usury, even one of his brother. And I set a great assembly against them. So when it says ye exact usury, every one of his brother, he's just saying, you're lending things out with interest, trying to get over on people, getting people in debt. People got to give up the lands and vineyards and children to be servants to people, and it's a mess. You're cheating some folks, basically. But in verse 6, he said after hearing about all this, he got angry. And in verse 7, it starts out with him saying, I had to consult with myself. I had to take a moment and just back up, just take a moment to breathe, just take a deep breath, just calm down. And I had to go off to the side, and I had to talk to myself about it. You ever have moments where that happens, where you get so mad and so fed up with the chaos around you and the things people are saying, and it's just a bunch of bull crap, so you get frustrated, but you don't want to go off, you want to keep calm, so you do this thing where you just go off to the side, and you're just like, okay, let me think about this. Let me rationalize this. Let me talk to myself about this. Let me talk myself. See, sometimes you get in situations where sometimes you don't have anybody to talk to that's going to be calm, that's going to be in their right mind about stuff. So sometimes the only human that you can consult with, because you can always consult with God, but the only human around you can consult with is yourself. Sometimes you just got to talk to yourself, in other words. That's the type of stuff I do. I'll be at work. Something goes down. People aren't using common sense about stuff. I get frustrated about something. Sometimes I just walk on into that restroom, and I just have to just have a moment where I just got to pray, and then I just got to talk to myself. I just consult with my own self. I'm just like, okay, Kobe, just calm down. You got to think this through. You can't blow up. You gotta try to set a Christian standard. I know now that everybody else is mad and going haywire and making not so bright decisions. Now you're getting mad, and now you want to give somebody a piece of your mind, but you gotta try to set a good Christian example. You gotta come down. You gotta think this through. You gotta be clear-headed. I just go to the restroom. I just lock myself in there. Just in there for a moment. Just got to consult with my own self. But sometimes you just got to do that too. So those are people to consult with. Obviously, God is who to consult with. And if it seems like he's not answering you, and he's not answering you because you're not acknowledging what he's wanting you to acknowledge, then that means it's time to acknowledge what God's trying to show you, so you can consult with him. Also, other godly people who are going to point you in the right direction, not folks that you think are just going to tell you what you want to hear, so that when things go down, you can point at them and say, well, they're the ones that told me to do it, so blah, 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 when you knew better. So godly people, and sometimes just consult with your own self. Sometimes get alone and talk to yourself about it. But now, let me go to the last spot. Now I'm going to 2 Corinthians. Let's see here. 2 Corinthians. Starting at chapter 10, verse 3. And this will be the last area I'll go to. It says, For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. Listen, sometimes folks do some crazy things. Sometimes it's really them. Sometimes people get into their flesh. I understand. But you must also understand that sometimes it's not necessarily them. Sometimes it's a spirit behind it. Sometimes spirits will use people and cause people to cause you trouble, to cause you grief, to cause you hardships, to cause you to blow up, to irritate you, to get you out of character, to embarrass you, to humiliate you, to do all kinds of stuff. Sometimes it's not the person. Sometimes it's the spirit. I'm not saying you should tolerate that person, because then you end up tolerating the spirit. What I'm saying is sometimes instead of viewing somebody as an enemy, sometimes you got to back up and consult with yourself and remind yourself, hey, it's a spirit behind this. Sometimes you just got to ask God for discernment to know sometimes if it's just a person or sometimes if it's just a spirit. Sometimes you got to use discerning of spirits, and sometimes things like that just happens. It just plays out that way. And when it does, you have to remember this right here, what I just read. We may be walking in flesh, but we don't war after the flesh. As Christians, our biggest battle is not the flesh and blood. It's spirits and principalities in high places, powers of the darkness of this world, powers of darkness. We have got to remember that. And so, even though we are in the world, we're not of the world. Just like how we're walking in flesh, but not walking after or warring after the flesh. Sorry, not warring after the flesh. So we must understand that and remember that. Verse 4 says, for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal or not fleshly, but mighty through God, listen, to the pulling down of strongholds. Now remember earlier when I was in Psalms talking about where David was talking about people wanting to pull down or cast down people from their excellency, innocent people, just because we imagine mischief. So instead of trying to pull down or cast down the innocent, we should want to pull down the demonic strongholds with spiritual warfare. In verse 5 it says, casting down imaginations, not casting down the good for our own greedy, grubby benefits, but casting down the imaginations, casting down the imaginations of mischief that we let play out in our minds that cause us to bear false witness against our neighbor out of jealousy or out of envy or spite. Whether it be to benefit ourselves or whether it be to benefit somebody that we're getting down kissing the behind of. Yeah, I went there. I said it. That's not what we should be doing. It's not about stepping over people to build a name up for ourselves. And it's not about getting down and kissing behind the people that we think will help us step over everybody else along the way to climb up the social ladder or whatever ladder, so-called ladder, we're trying to reach the top of and gain. We know all the good promotion comes from the Lord on high. And so we must remember that what goes up must come down. Sometimes if you want to be raised up, sometimes you have to humble yourself. And sometimes when all you want is exaltation, you'll start finding ways through man to be exalted, which means turning your back on God. Trying to be like Saul, trying to keep or hold on to things or positions, or be like Balak and Balaam and all these other people, like the Pharaohs of this world. Getting involved, turning against God and getting involved with darkness, running from light just to make a name or to keep a name or a position or a title or to feel like a somebody or to get the hand claps or pats on the back. But continuing on with verse 5, casting down imaginations. So the pulling down of strongholds and the casting down of imaginations, not the pulling down or casting down of innocent while letting imaginations of mischief play out. It says also in verse 5, and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. We have to get to a place where the thoughts that play out in our head, the thoughts of mischief, the thoughts of hurting people, the thoughts of rape, the thoughts of murder, the thoughts of suicide, the thoughts of theft, all these things that we let play out in our heads. We have the thoughts of pornography from things of the past that we've seen. We've got to take these thoughts And these imaginations of wickedness and mischief, we've got to take these into captivity. We cannot let them run rampant in our heads, lest we speak things and act things out. We have to consult God. We have to be careful who we consult. So before you get on that phone and say, hello, can I schedule a consultation? You don't need to go see a fortune teller. You don't need to see a psychic. You don't need to see a palm reader. You don't need to sit down with somebody with tarot cards and a Ouija board. You don't need to do any of that. You need to be consulting God, because that's a hotline that is always open. The prayer line never shuts down. I'll pray us out of here. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this word. I thank you for another time to minister another word. It's always a joy and a blessing to give these words, and I pray that people would tune in and listen. And for those that need this word, I pray that they will get it, that people would turn away from the powers of darkness, that people would want to get saved and set free and delivered from the madness of this world, from the wickedness of this world, and that they would rise up and realize that the best way to rise and to be exalted is through you, not the promotions of wickedness, but the promotions of God. And Lord, I thank you. And I just give you all the praise and glory, Father. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.